The AI revolution is here. But for many leaders and practitioners, it has created a fog of uncertainty. How can we move fast without compromising security? Welcome to the AI Security Nexus podcast, your strategic lens into the intersection of AI and cybersecurity.
Welcome to the AI Security Nexus podcast, the definitive bridge between artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. I'm your host, Charlie McCarthy, and each episode we take a deep dive into the ever-growing AI security threat landscape. This time, I sat down with Michael Brown, head of AI/ML security research at Trail of Bits. We touched on a wide variety of things, but most impressively, their team's recent success at DEF CON 33 in the AI Cyber Challenge presented by DARPA. This is a good one. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the meat of this interview, do you mind getting the audience a little bit familiar with your professional journey and kind of what brought you to this point in your career working on AI/ML with Trail of Bits?
Yeah, sure. I know it's been a bit of a ride, that's for sure. So I've always been interested in computing as a profession. So I went to University of Cincinnati for my undergrad, got my undergrad in computer science. Then went and did something completely different for like 8 years after that. I joined the Army and flew helicopters. And as I was getting out of the Army, I was getting married, having kids. So I decided, I probably need to get back into a line of work that leaves me home a little bit more. So I got my master's degree from Georgia Tech online while I was still in the military, got out, started working for them, and kind of found my way into doing security research just through the work that I had studied as a graduate student. Did most of a PhD at Georgia Tech, and then eventually moved on to come work at Trail of Bits here. So I started as a senior security engineer and worked myself up to a principal security engineer. Now I lead a team of about 7 or 8 full-time employees who do work on AI/ML security research. So it really has kind of 2 primary flavors. The one that we're going to talk about today is more using AI and ML to achieve security objectives. So this means try to solve problems that conventional analysis techniques for cybersecurity is kind of plateaued, but now there's all kinds of opportunities that we have to really push the boundary using fuzzier techniques that you get with AI/ML. And then we also do a little bit of work in securing AI/ML systems. We're currently doing some work building out AI bill of materials tools, but the work that we did on the AI Cyber Challenge definitely falls into like, how do you take an AI/ML tool and use it to help you solve conventional cybersecurity problems that we've been stymied with for the last several years.
Right. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. And also thank you for your service. What an interesting career that spans, a couple different categories. That's pretty cool. So to your point, on the MLSecOps podcast and within the community, we, for the most part, talk about AI security on the side of the coin that talks about securing the AI ecosystem. But today we're going to be talking more about the other side of the coin, using AI to secure more traditional software and protect it. Before we get into the details of Buttercup, which was super innovative, can you give the audience a little bit of the origin story of the DARPA AI Cyber Challenge and maybe like what the fundamental problem was that was trying to be solved and the stakes for the teams that were involved?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of go all the way back to the beginning. So DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They exist as a funder of research for which there's no immediate commercial market available for it. So this is kind of like, medical research. It gets done in a lot of universities, and that's because there's not necessarily a commercial demand for this, but it lifts up humanity when we do these kinds of research projects. So in this case, one of the things that DARPA had recognized is that there was a serious security gap with open source security software. A lot of the software libraries that make up applications, both in commercial, government, and personal use, a lot of these are open source software packages that are kind of thanklessly and without pay being maintained by really passionate maintainers from all over the world. And when we find vulnerabilities in these systems, we don't really have the infrastructure in place to go out there and remediate them the way that we would probably expect it to, given how important they are to how we build software systems these days. So a good example of this is Log4j. When the vulnerabilities were discovered in Log4j, they became a huge issue because it turned out that this open source package that somebody had created, wasn't getting paid for, was maintaining in their own volunteer hours, was now pervasive. It was everywhere. Everyone was vulnerable, and they had to go back and kind of take this feature out that was vulnerable. So DARPA has recognized that securing this giant ecosystem of open source software, it's really tilted in the advantage of attackers. Attackers have to be right one place at one time, and defenders have to be right all the time everywhere. And organizations are doing a good job of defending themselves. They have IT staff, they have security engineering staff, and they have their own calculus for how they want to defend their software, but they don't look at open source software. Some of the big players in tech will invest via the open source security foundations and trying to improve the security posture of these various tools and various like ecosystems. But that's few and far between. So they came up with this idea. What if we challenge the research staff that exists to kind of bid and propose on DARPA projects, these big swing, high risk, high reward type projects? Let's challenge them with an open competition to build a fully automated AI driven cyber reasoning system that can find and patch vulnerabilities within the open source ecosystem. So the idea is that we take this and we tip the scales back in favor of defenders, where now they can use tools like AI that give us the promise of massive scale, working while we sleep. And now with the advent of large language models and artificial intelligence more generally, the ability to go out and actually solve some of these really challenging problems. So the AI Cyber Challenge started 2 years ago. It consisted of 3 phases. The first was concept competition. The second was an actual competition round that took place last year at DEF CON. And then the finals took place at DEF CON just a couple months ago. So TrailBits competed in all 3 of those. We're a longtime DARPA performer. So we typically work on these big high risk, high reward type projects, the most challenging problems in security. And we did really well. We took second place, and we won about $6 million in prizes along the way for our original concept.
Wow.
For a win in the semifinals and then a win in the finals.
Wow. Sorry, did you say, Michael, that the first phase of the competition started 2 years ago?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow, that's crazy. And so your entire team has worked through these 3 phases over the last couple years. That's a lot of time and energy. As you got into the final phases, I mean, it's a pretty high stakes competition with significant prizes. What did that feel like, especially as you moved into like phase 3 for you and the team? Being in that final round and competing against, I'm sure, a lot of other super innovative solutions. What was that like for you guys, just from like a personal and emotional standpoint?
It was a ride. I'm not going to lie. So typically when we work on DARPA projects, they'll put out a solicitation. They'll give us this big problem that they want to go solve.
Yeah.
And then, us and our competitors, whether it be universities, whether it be other small businesses like TrailBits, we all put our heads together and then we kind of come up with an idea for what we think will work. We propose it, and then we hope that we get our bid accepted. And if we do, then we typically work on the project for, we're between 18 and 36 months, but we know up front that, we won the contract, like we're going to go execute on a contract. This competition was different because there was no guarantee of payoff ever. So it was much more nerve wracking, certainly much more challenging. The fact that it was an open competition that anyone could go in, and anybody could try to win this whole thing. There's a lot of unknowns. Usually like the competitive aspect of working for, on federal research programs, usually it stops once you put a proposal in. You either got accepted,
or you don't
to work on it, or you didn't.
Yeah.
This, you're constantly dealing with, there's a cut down at the next level. So for example, the first phase, the concept white paper phase, DARPA awarded $1 million in seed funding to 7 small businesses to help them kind of offset these like sort of weird financial restrictions that keep them from participating in competitions like these. Universities a little bit easier. They have different kind of economics around grad students versus like professional researchers. So, there was a time where we were like, what happens if our concept paper doesn't win seed funding? Like, do we still compete at risk, or do we, maybe, look at teaming up with someone else who did get seed funding? And unfortunately, we didn't have to broach that, that plan B. We were basically, seed funded. We got a $2 million prize in the semifinals for being one of the top 7 teams and advancing to the finals. So we even though it was really nerve wracking, we still kind of always had the financial aspect of it taken care of because we were successful at each stage. But that wasn't the case for a lot of our competitors. So when I say it was nerve wracking and kind of a departure from how we usually work for us, it was, we had it easy compared to what a lot of our other competitors had to deal with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having that financing in the background to help lessen the justification that you have to make for doing the work and having the people resources and stuff is very nice. Okay, so Trail of Bits system that took second place, again, for the audience, is called Buttercup. I want to pause there because that's a memorable name. First thing it makes me think of is the Princess Bride. So I have to ask, like, how did it get its name?
I wish we had a really great story for this, but we kind of don't. So when I wrote the original concept for Buttercup, for the competition, my kids were obsessed with the movie WALL-E, so I actually named it Patchy to start. But then a little bit further down the line, we decided that, like, we wanted something a little bit more marketable, a little bit easier to remember, and then somebody suggested Buttercup. We were all fans of the Princess Bride, so the name kind of,
that is a Princess Bride reference.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a couple of names that were being floated around. That one became the biggest snowball rolling downhill, and eventually it took over. So it is much easier to remember and say than Patchy, or you don't have to worry about, like, not having an obscure Disney reference. I think more people have seen and appreciated the Princess Bride, perhaps in the small Disney robot. I don't know.
Well,
maybe it's probably the other way around, actually, but
I don't know. It resonated with me, and I've seen practically nothing. I am not up on pop culture, so there we go. Okay. Can you talk to us, Michael, about the design philosophy behind Buttercup? There's a presentation, I think, on the Trail of Bits website, which I'll share a link to in the transcript for this show for the audience, that mentions a guiding principle of breaking down the problem and then using the best technique for each sub-problem within that larger problem. What did that mean for y'all in practice?
Yeah, so when we started off with this project, we like, these DARPA programs, they're massive, and most of the time when you read a problem that DARPA lays out in front of us, the first thing we say is, okay, that's impossible. But then we think about it a little bit more. We're like, okay, maybe it'll be possible if. And then eventually we get to the point where, like, okay, this has a pretty decent chance of working if these different things all work out. So very rarely do you get a problem put in front of you that is so massive, comprised of so many sub problems, where everything has to go right in sequence for things to work. So right off the bat, these problems they're among the most challenging problems in research. That, like, you can't look up a solution for these because no one's even tried to do them before.
Right.
If it's something that's been done before, it's not something that DARPA or ARPA H or any of the government funding agencies, that's just not what they're there to do. So at the risk of, I don't know, sounding too cool for school, I've been working at the intersection of AI/ML, compilers, software analysis, and security research for the last 8 or 9 years now. So I was working with how do you solve conventional security problems with AI/ML solutions before the large language model kind of became the predominant form of the technology. So over the last couple of years, some of the things that we've been helping our clientele, various government organizations, in understanding is, what are the actual capabilities of large language models with respect to traditional security problems? So when this competition came around, we had kind of some unique insights and frankly, probably some more pragmatic insights as to what these models were actually capable of doing versus what they actually were not capable of doing. So when we took a look at how we would build this system, we said, okay, we've got to do, these 5 things. And some of these problems are really kind of already solved by conventional techniques. Some of these are still very open, but they lend themselves towards an AI/ML type solution. So from the beginning, we wanted a best of both worlds approach. We wanted to combine what would work best from the AI/ML kind of collection of problem solving techniques and the conventional software analysis, collection of problem solving techniques, and kind of piece them together and chain them together. So we wanted to use, a component where it was strong, and we wanted to minimize the number of kind of compounding errors that would occur over the course of the pipeline, trying to solve this, like, long end-to-end problem. So yeah, we were, from the very beginning, we were never going to use AI for everything. And from the very beginning, we were never going to ignore the fact that it was the AI Cyber challenge and just try to do it with just all conventional techniques. We knew both of those kind of extremes were just never going to work. So we took a very hybrid very pragmatic approach to going about this competition.
Got it. Makes sense. One of the things that really stood out to me within the design framework when I was looking through that PDF presentation on the website was the patcher portion of the design. And the reason that it stood out is because I have been seeing within the open source world some LLM-based vulnerability detection systems, but that's all that they do is they detect vulnerabilities. There's not like a remediation piece necessarily on the back end, and definitely not patching, at least not something that comprehensive that I've seen thus far. So the multi-agent system approach that y'all took was particularly fascinating. You had 3, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, software security and quality engineers, agents. Can you talk about what each of those agents did, why you chose a multi-agent approach, and kind of how they worked together to create that patch?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first off, I want to give kudos to DARPA and ARPA H for the way they structured the competition. They made patching the most important part of this competition. Submitting a patch for a vulnerability was worth 3 times as much as discovering the vulnerability. And that's really reflective of the actual priorities we have when it comes to fixing open source software or fixing really any kind of software. And honestly, it's kind of just like a general thing that affects humanity. It's much easier to point out a problem than it is actually suggest a solution that'll work.
Exactly.
So open source maintainers, if you think about it, they're constantly being told their software is broken, but no one is stepping up to help them fix it.
Right. What are you supposed to do about it?
Yeah. So, the goal of this program is to take this one step further. So, there's some great work that Google has done supporting the open source community with their tool OSS Fuzz. It does a great job of them footing the bill for finding vulnerabilities in software. Really, all they ask is, hey, if you build software packages, give us some shim code or some interface for us to be able to use our fuzzer against it, and we'll fuzz it and help you find the vulnerabilities. Well, this still doesn't handle the remediation part. What do we actually do with it? So even though, as a community, we've made, tremendous investments and there's lots of work being done to find vulnerabilities, patching them is still the most important part, because then they just, they go from being a 0 day to an end day, but that doesn't really change anything for us. We actually need to fix these to be more secure. So really, like I said, kudos to DARPA and ARPA H for making that really the centerpiece of this. That's part of the reason why our patcher was the most complex component of Buttercup, is because that was the most important part. That was the part that we really wanted to knock out of the park. So when we first started this project, it was 2 years ago, which is like 5 lifetimes in the development of AI technology these days. We had drawn some inspiration from some very early papers that weren't even peer reviewed. They were showing up on archive, talking about how to solve really complex problems. Because at the time, you would ask GPT 3.5 or Claude Sonnet 3, hey, find a vulnerability in the software and patch it, and it just absolutely would not work. You could give it a lot of context, like here's all the code, and it still would have trouble. And that was because the problem wasn't being broken down into smaller chunks that were solvable by the model. Later models from OpenAI and Anthropic, like the reasoning or thinking models, they're trying to do this on their own. But the biggest gap between problem solving for these long, complex end-to-end problems are that they're really hard to encapsulate into a single prompt and get a single answer from. If I need to ask the model, hey, give me advice on what outfit I should wear this evening, it's a pretty constrained problem. And you can constrain it even further by saying, I have a blue shirt, I have a green shirt, and I have a pair of jeans and a brown pair of pants, and this is the event that I'm going to. What should I wear? Asking it to find a patch of vulnerability is incredibly context heavy to get a good answer for. So we had found, and the initial research had shown that if you break the problem up for a model and you really constrain the problem you're asking them to solve to something where you can provide really rich context, you're much more likely to get a better result. But what that means is you have to kind of chain together the sequence of problem solving. So we went with a multi-agent patching system because it let us do that for what is basically a really complex problem. So we had 3 or 4 distinct personas. I think it was 3 for the semifinals and kind of 4 for the finals. By personas, I mean we had separate LLMs that were given separate prompts, and they were given separate bits of context and asked to solve a small subset of the problem. So we would go into the patcher knowing that we had discovered a vulnerability, and we'd ask a agent that had been prompted to act as a quality or as a software engineer and say, hey, thanks for the program. It's great, but it has this bug on this line. I need you to go fix it. So they would go at it with okay, I'm going to generate code type mindset, and they would generate code to fix a problem in the code. Then it would be handed off to a quality assurance agent that's been prompted to say, hey, your job is testing this code to make sure it works. So that agent was configured with the ability to compile the code, the ability to test it against the original crashing test case that we found to make sure that the bug had been fixed, and the ability to run unit tests, integration tests, functionality tests that were provided along with the program to make sure that we didn't break anything else while we tried to fix this one problem. So if the quality assurance agent found issues, it would know, okay, I've got to go report this back to the software engineer. Now, occasionally these two would get stuck, and we'd have to reflect on the reasoning behind the problem. So this is where we had a third persona that was prompted as more like a security engineer mindset to say, hey, okay, what is the root cause of this vulnerability? How do I actually have to patch this? Because it's a little bit more complicated than fixing a bug. So ultimately, by being able to pass around different like subsets of the problem to these three different agents, we additionally added some other agents that did things like adding, better context retrieval, better reflection, that kind of thing. But for the most part, we really had these three kind of personas that were working in tandem. None of them had to solve the whole problem themselves. We didn't ask like, hey, generate code, but also think about the security problems and also make sure it passes these tests.
Yeah, which I imagine why it's so successful, because they each got their own narrow scope within those user personas. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really allowed us to also validate the outputs much more easily from each component. So when the software engineering agent like produced code, like the quality assurance agent acted as basically a check to make sure that it actually passed these various tests. And if it failed, it had its own context for assessing the reason why. The same with kind of the security engineering agent. So made it a lot easier for us to avoid having this like one giant black box of prompt goes in, vulnerability goes in, and we just hope a good patch comes out.
Right.
Yeah, because we could have just tested the patch afterward, but then say, you go back to the model and say, hey, it didn't work. You have to hope that it kind of
even begin to identify where things went askew.
You have to hope that it kind of reproduces this process that would actually take place in a real software engineering company, where you have people who have different jobs and they do different things, and you need them to solve different subsets of problems. And you don't just, ask one 10x engineer to go, handle every single issue that comes up. It actually it's good to have specialists. And we recreated that more or less with our patcher.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good logic. You mentioned the software engineer agent or persona getting kind of tangled up or stuck with the quality engineer agent occasionally. Did that have anything to do with the hang up that y'all called out during round 2 of the finals? I'd read something about y'all experienced a little bit of a big crash in round 2. What happened there, and how did you manage to bounce back for the third round, if you can share?
Yeah, no, I can. So fortunately, that was not the problem, because if it was, that would have been a harder problem to solve, because they were using third-party large language models. We don't really have control over how their inner workings go, or really, the models are pretty non-deterministic. So we wouldn't really be able to kind of reliably solve that problem. But yeah, so for context, for the finals, we had one final scored round that took place right before DEF CON. But before that, we had 3 practice rounds. This is to make sure that your cyber reasoning system would work when it's deployed at scale and running. So there's, even though this was a competition and it was research focused, there was a tremendous amount of engineering, uptime, reliability that went into this. That was also a really big focus for us as we went about solving this problem. And, we thought we were doing really well. The first exhibition round, there's only a couple of challenges, only a couple of vulnerabilities to find. We found all of them, and we did it with 100% accuracy. So like, okay, and that was better than any of the other teams had done. So we're like, oh man, we're doing great. We go into the second round, and then we process a couple of challenges, and then like the system just puked entirely. So it was actually the worst possible case, because if it had just bombed out at the very beginning, we would have thought, okay, something bad happened. Let's go fix this.
Yeah.
But it processed basically the first 3 of 18 total challenges and then just like stopped. We're like,
So you got
Oh
Lord
man.
all sense of security, no pun intended.
Yeah, no, we all started like polishing our resumes and we're like, we're getting fired for this. Like, there's no way we come out of this. And then, we looked at it for a day or two and, fortunately found out that it was just like a system, a very basic system issue. So
Oh, good.
basically what had happened is we had to store information about crashes and we were using information from the crash itself to make the file name, to make sure the file names would be unique. And then we had an assumption that would always be a short enough file name, and it turned out to be a bad assumption. So what we had happen was, after like basically the fourth challenge, we're producing crashes that were causing us to try and give something a file name on the system that was too long. And that happened to just be the right type of crash to make the component that was in charge of vulnerability discovery just completely stop working. And it stopped working for the rest of the competition time period. So we fixed that very easily. We reran everything. And then, we did quite well when we looked at like the 18 challenges that they had sent us. We basically redid our own run of round 2 using our own resources and found that we had actually found and patched vulnerabilities in all 18 challenges. So that was, that was what I said earlier. It's been a ride. That was the ride where it's like, your success is never, your success is never guaranteed, and you're only a year away at best from a check on how good you actually are at doing your job. And also, usually, like when the open competition part of this was super nerve wracking, because usually, like if you fail on research projects, it's pretty quiet. Nobody knows about it except for you and the people who are funding you. This was like you had the potential to bomb very publicly, and nobody wanted that.
Oh my gosh, what a roller coaster. But it all turned out okay. So the final scored round was obviously a huge success for y'all. Are there any key metrics, Michael, or accomplishments from that final scored round that you can call out for us that maybe you were most proud of?
Yeah. So one of the things I was really proud of our team and our cyber reasoning system for doing was we did everything well. So several of the teams, so we didn't come in first place. The team that came in first place, they also used a hybrid approach. They had a slightly larger team, and they used some more resources. So there was a little bit of like kind of economies of scale working there.
Sure.
But they're from Georgia Tech, so like they're from my alma mater. So if I've got to get beat by anybody, I'm happy to get beat by the people that I used to, that I used to go to grad school with. So yeah, they're great folks and really, really smart. But yeah, it was kind of vindicating because they use a really similar approach to ours. So I think in kind of like the ideological battle of should this all be IA or should this all be AI or should this all be conventional stuff? Is it all hype or is it like a combination of both? The combination of both story really won out for first and second place. So getting back, I guess, kind of the original question, some of the other competitors that we beat out, some of them did really, really good at finding vulnerabilities. They found more vulnerabilities than we did, but they had issues with engineering, and they weren't able to patch as many of their vulnerabilities. So there was another competitor that had also reported that they had kind of like a bug that got introduced really late. So there ended up being like this kind of hidden component, which was engineering discipline. And that's one of the things we pride ourselves that as a small business, that we produce open source tools and we produce research grade tools. But we produce them at a high enough standard where people can reuse them and they don't kind of bit rot immediately. So that the engineering discipline that we brought to the problem meant that, when we did everything well, and we did it with high accuracy too. I mentioned before that the people that we're trying to benefit and the people that we're trying to change the game for are these open source maintainers that they get told all the time their stuff is broken and they just have to hope they have enough volunteer time to fix it. We want to be able to change the game to being like, people are like, whether it's an AI system that's validated by a human or just the AI system itself, we want to be saying, here's a vulnerability. Here's how we know it exists. So it's not a false positive. And here's a patch that will fix it. And that, to the best of our knowledge, doesn't break anything else. So now you don't have to solve the problem. You just have to approve the pull request. And that's still not nothing. And that's not trivial. But it's a lot closer to, automating the process of helping these people out and maintain their software. So if your patches don't work or they're broken or you can't prove that the actual vulnerability exists, even though you're submitting a pull request, now you still have a lot of burden that goes on that open source maintainer. So if you actually take a look at us in second place, we had about a 90% accuracy. And basically you would have reduced accuracy if you had patches that didn't work.
Mm.
Our accuracy dropped from 100% down to 90 was actually because we would find out as the competition was going on that we would have created a patch that didn't fully solve the problem, and we would throw it out and go make a better version of the patch. So that's where our accuracy drop came from. But ultimately, like, our design philosophy was, we are not submitting anything unless we know it to be true. We know it to be a true positive. False positives are such a problem with AI that, and alert fatigue is a real thing. So we knew if we went out there and produced something that had a lot of, had low accuracy, that one, we weren't going to win the competition because accuracy was part of the scoring. But two, also nobody would use our tool afterward. So the third place finisher, they relied on AI a bit more upfront, and they were a bit more speculative, and they had an accuracy of about 45%.
Oh, interesting.
And we beat them by 9 points. So it ended up being where it's kind of hard to tell. I don't have access to their data, so I don't know exactly how it happened. It's possible that by being speculative, they kind of caught up and got into third place. But it's also possible that by allowing such a, but by essentially by allowing or being okay with false positives, they actually took themselves out of the running and let us kind of jump them for second place. So I won't know until DARPA releases all the data. But I can say that by being good at everything, having solid engineering discipline, and by having high accuracy, which is reflective of the needs of real world maintainers, that's what put us in second place.
Got it. One of the other things that really stood out to me as I was reading about the project was Trail of Bits seemed to be very cost effective, especially toward the end. I think the number was y'all used only like 40%, or excuse me, $40,000 of the available budget in the final round. And that seems important when you think about moving out of like a competition environment. Can you talk about that efficiency and why that might be an important thing down the road?
Yeah, I mean, so even in the semifinals, Buttercup was always one of the cheapest tools to run. At Trail of Bits, we work on these government research projects, but to the maximum degree possible, and this is determined by the U.S. government on the contract, they get the final say. We make our tools open source. We make them freely available. We believe that security, the work that we do, particularly that we do on taxpayer dollars, it should be a rising tide that lifts all ships. It shouldn't be like some tool that we, keep inside and hope that we can make money off of later. Like we hire smart people and we do really hard work. That's how we make money. We don't need to worry about trying to like productize or shrink wrap this, piece of software that we built. We want people to use it. And if we create a system that requires $100,000 and 15 days to run, then people aren't able to use it. So we always kind of went into this, particularly our best of both worlds approach, between conventional and AI driven solutions to problems. This was always because we had costs like in mind as a factor for us in terms of like winning the competition and creating a tool that would actually be used after the competition. In the semifinals, we got a shout out from Andrew Carney, the program manager who ran the cyber challenge. He's a program manager at DARPA H, also a former seat at DARPA. He actually said, "Hey, Trail of Bits, we had a minuscule budget. We had like $500 in the LLM credits for the first for the semifinals, and they told us that he said, Trail of Bits, we were the most judicious with the use of our LLMs. I think we used something like $13 out of all of it, and we were one of the top 7 teams when we were participating in these exhibition rounds. This first exhibition round that we did well in, if you remember, I said, we found all the vulnerabilities, we patched all of them. We did it for about $1,000, and we had about a $30,000 budget available. So getting to the finals, the scale in terms of like how much compute we could use, how many LLM credits we had available to us, it was massive, absolutely massive. I think if I remember correctly, the final budget was something like $130,000. You had like $80,000 in compute that you could, just burn cycles on Azure, and then you had like something like $40,000 or $50,000 in LLM credits that you could use as well. We only used $40,000. If you remember, the team that came in first, They found a lot more vulnerabilities and they patched more vulnerabilities than we did, but they also spent 2.5 times as much resources. They spent something close to $120,000 out of the budget. Now, to be fair, we did try to use that money. We didn't want to leave anything on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So we did try to scale our solution up to the maximum level possible. We also had to be conservative. We wanted to make sure we didn't run out of of budget before we had processed all of the challenges. So we had to be a little conservative, and ultimately that conservatism, meant we only spent about a third of the budget that was available, but we still came in second place, and we still did really, really well. And part of that is because, honestly, we probably could have gotten the same performance and spent maybe 20,000 or maybe 10,000. A lot of that was resources that came from scaling wide, not necessarily being more in depth with our analysis. And ultimately, what that has done is that has let us take Buttercup to the next step, which we made available as we were being announced as one of the winners at DEF CON. We had to open source Buttercup as part of the terms of competing in the competition. But we actually took it one step further. So not only did we replace the competition versions of Buttercup, we released a version that is standalone. It doesn't have anything to do with DARPA's infrastructure, so anybody can use it. More importantly, it runs on a laptop and it runs for $100. So anybody can use this now. So if you have a laptop and you're willing to download our software and you're willing to put an OpenAI, a Google, or an Anthropic LLM key in there and give us $100 of budget to work with, we can show you through a demo, through one of the sample problems that was used in the competition, that Buttercup can find a vulnerability and it can patch it. And it does it in about a little bit less than an hour. So That's a simple example. We left all the hooks in to scale it up and down. So really, by being judicious with our resources from the beginning, we've made a tool now that anybody can use at any scale. You can use it on the laptop that we're recording this podcast on. A medium-sized organization can put it in the cloud, and they can run it for $30,000 if that's a budget they have. And, big tech companies, we hope folks like Google, who did great work with OSS Fuzz, we hope they steal this and use it to keep doing it, because, they're the ones with the billions of dollars and accounts in Ireland or something that they can use to really, make a dent with this. Like, our company doesn't have that kind of money. We're not going to be able to do that. So yeah, like the reason why we were really judicious with resources was so we could achieve the reality that exists today, where anybody can use the tool for whatever budget you have. You can use Buttercup.
Wow. Such a juggling act, and what a testament to just the brain power and ingenuity on your team, especially with that second place finish. And it makes it really exciting to think about the future of automated security, because, this opens up so many ideas and it's going to get creative juices flowing for people. One of the big focuses of our show, Michael, of course, is education for the industry. You and your team, were there any particular learning outcomes or key takeaways that you all took away as professionals from this 2-year experience? And what's next?
Yeah, there was definitely a couple of things that came about from this. So I'm going to start off with one that pats myself on the back, and that is we were really, but don't worry, I'm going to follow up with one that I was wrong about too. So the first one, it really vindicated our approach by coming in second place, and also having the first place finishers adopt a really similar strategy to ours. We said from the beginning, even while the AI hype cycle was intense and never ending, that AI was not going to be the only, that you weren't going to be able to get in here and just win this with a prompt. You had to do, honest to goodness, real security engineering. You had to combine it with judicious and really careful applications of AI. And you had to do everything well, with a strong engineering discipline to win. Both of the teams that took first and second place did that. The team that took third place was a little bit LLM heavy. They call themselves, or this is their words. Tyler Nice-Wonder from Theory, he said this himself, and he's a great guy, and they did an amazing job. He said they were more AI forward, but they still had components that were conventional software security analysis in there.
Mm-hmm.
So when nobody went in this and won this with a prompt. Nobody went in there and said, "Hey, I'm just going to use O3 and say, here's the code, find the vulnerability, and give me a patch." That didn't work. So it was really vindicating. So we confirmed what we already kind of knew, but what had yet to become mainstream knowledge, that AI is going to be a multiplier. It's going to help us solve problems for which we need solutions, but the problems are kind of descriptive in nature versus stuff that we can go solve with an algorithm. They're going to work well when paired with the things that we've already built as humans to help us solve problems that are well defined. So there's no reason to try and go back and gut these pre-existing solutions and throw them out and just throw AI at everything. We need to put these things together. It's another tool in the box. It works for a very It works for a very specific set of problems that we didn't have good answers for before. So it is a huge advancement, but it's not going to replace humans at solving a lot of problems. It's not going to replace the existing solutions and tools that we have for solving a lot of problems, but it's going to help us solve new things. And by extension, it's going to help us comprise solutions that solve bigger problems end to end, because now we can fill in these specific gaps that we didn't have before with AI.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing we learned. But the second one is that I'm going to be honest. For most of my career, I've been an AI skeptic, which has sadly made me a really good, AI security researcher. I was kind of blown away at a couple of different times in this competition at how well AI performed. There was times where, at the beginning I was like, this is going to bomb. Like, the people who win this are going to get a couple of points because the AI is not going to be able to handle patching, or it's not really going to be able to make the vulnerability discovery stuff move fast enough to win this competition or to do well. Somebody was going to win it. Somebody was going to score some points, but I didn't expect it to the success level to be where it was. So I was blown away, and kind of had to reevaluate some of my thoughts on how effective large language models would be. When I saw how good our patcher worked in the first scored round, the semifinals, our patcher was one of the strongest components there. I think our team did the best in patching. Anytime we found a vulnerability, our patcher did it. Our patcher was able to patch it. That was more than I expected. Our success rate with patching using a multi-agent large language model-based system is way above what I expected. Similarly, we use AI large language models to help us accelerate the process of discovering vulnerabilities with conventional approaches. We kind of attach it to a fuzzing system, and we use we use it to help the fuzzing system both find vulnerabilities faster and find vulnerabilities more often than we find just kind of typical bugs that aren't exploitable. And I was really also stunned at how effective they were. So I went into this much more skeptical than I am now. Still skeptical, but just a lot less. Now I'm in the moderate level of skepticism as opposed to very skeptical. But so yeah, we learned those are kind of the two biggest things that I took away from the competition.
Got it. I'm going to ask you a hot take, and you kind of alluded to it in the first part of your last answer, but for the future of automated cybersecurity, do you see us getting to a point in the future, and if so, when, where these systems are kind of monitoring themselves and patching themselves and humans don't have to touch it a whole lot? Or do you envision a human always being in the loop? And what is that timeline if you had to, and I won't hold you to this quote later, because, things are moving, but just right now, what does that feel like for you?
I'm going to give you an answer you probably don't expect. And the answer is yes, but it's going to be heavily caveated.
Yes, it's all going to be automated on its own without much of a human interaction.
Yeah, but the answer is for certain classes of security issues.
Okay.
Certain classes of security issues, large language models are really well suited for. So, for example, when you get a brand new wireless router that you set up in your house, if you don't change the default credentials, that's a security problem that is very much like a low-level, low-hanging fruit type security problem that large language models are going to be very adept at finding and identifying, and even telling you how to fix. So are other types of common misconfigurations. Now, I think these are the kind of classes of vulnerabilities that as we start deploying fully automated AI vulnerability scanning and remediation systems, that I think we're largely going to automate away. But there's always going to be these really nasty classes of vulnerabilities, like vulnerabilities that cross the software stack, like memory corruption vulnerabilities that don't even actually exist as real flaws within the building blocks of things we build. It's how we put them together, things like logic bugs. We still need humans to solve these. And I think AI, the large language model, as it's currently architected, as the transformer architecture is currently built, they're, barring 2 or 3 major leaps forward breakthroughs in technology, these models are not going to handle these bugs. So really what I say, when I say this is heavily caveated, I like to bring this back to the concept of the CVE severity score. So right now, when we find a vulnerability, we score it from 0 to 10 about how bad it is. And the reason why we do that is so we can feel good about ignoring it, because we don't have enough time or money to fix everything.
Right.
If we think about it, when we find a vulnerability and the question comes up of should we fix this, the answer should be yes. It shouldn't be, well, it depends on how bad
is it.
So when I talked about like systems like Buttercup being able to tip the scales back in the favor of defenders, what I mean by that is we have this giant, population of bugs out there that need to get fixed. A lot of them are exploitable. A lot of them aren't. Large language right now, the people who work in the security space get inundated and they have to try and triage and figure out which ones to fix.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff gets just accepted as risk that we're going to accept because we think it's not severe, but maybe it is severe. And we just didn't know. It was like lack of imagination that we rated something a 5 instead of a 9.8 as a severity score. I see a future where, systems like Buttercup, they handle the low hanging fruit and they handle it almost automated, almost completely automatic. And then the people that we have working as security engineers, they don't have to worry about triage tasks. They don't have to worry about dealing with 1,000 new bug reports that come up, over the course of the year. They look at only the ones that the AI models can't solve on their own because they're too complicated. And then we use human intelligence to go solve those. So yeah, when, I said before, like AI isn't going to fix everything. And I mean that, but AI can fix a big part of it and it can do it at scale. And that's still really important, even though AI isn't going to go out there tomorrow and stop the next, Spectre. It's not going to stop. It's not going to prevent, groups like the NSO group from like developing, these 0-click and 1-click like iPhone messaging exploits. Like those things are still going to exist because our systems are just like infinitely complex. But what we can do is we can protect all the people who, have who forget to change their credentials on their wireless router. Or when software engineers make stupid boneheaded mistakes that are very easy to spot with pattern recognition machines. We can fix all that stuff and we can make it so that the cost to do that is extremely small. It's amateurized and we take care of all this low hanging fruit. So we clear out the kind of the clutter on the security engineers job board and we get them focused on the things that they actually need human intelligence to solve.
What a time to be alive. Like as you're talking right now, and we've just got a couple of minutes. I'm going to wrap us up here in a minute, Michael. But as you're talking, I'm just thinking now about AI, its capabilities, the blast radius and attack surface, and envisioning like in 10 years, you're talking about the CVSS. I'm like, one day somebody is going to decide, or a group of people are going to decide that it is okay and sufficient for us to use AI to score AI vulnerabilities or other types of vulnerabilities. And, we're not going to have to worry about the creativity or, us scoring it as a 5. And someone's going to hack into that system and make it so that, certain vulnerabilities are scored a certain way so that they can have this chain of attacks to you never know, right? Like it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's turtles all the way down.
Probably not feasible, but, who knows what the future holds.
Yeah, I think everything you said there is pretty reasonable. Honestly, there's a natural use case for triage when it comes to using AI systems. It's a great problem for it because it's fuzzy. We're tolerant of mistakes because humans make mistakes at this all the time, and these are the kinds of places for us to use AI. We need to try and get away from the prevailing notion that we're going to use AI to solve everything. When we need the right answer, and you need the right answer every time, AI is actually not really that great of a solution because they're pretty much guaranteed to give you a wrong answer at least some of the time. So, the advances we're gonna see are going to be where we make smart and dutiful applications of AI for constrained, context-rich problems that we have a tolerance for false positives for. And once we kind of start focusing on that as a group of technologists, I think we're all going to be really, really surprised at how far this actually takes us.
Yeah. And what we need to keep top of mind is when we're thinking about these use cases, what's smart, what we actually need it for, what can improve our lives and help optimize that security piece. Like, okay, I'm using it for this thing, but how can someone exploit it, and make sure that we're defending against that too. All right. Sir, this was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time. For our audience, go check out Buttercup at trailofbits.com/Buttercup. Once again, I want to thank our distinguished guest, Michael Brown. And Michael, I hope we get to talk again very soon.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having me on.